The Year to Their podcast, it's time to start the show. Be sure to hold on tight, here we go. Exploring all the different Disney destinations. Year to Their, it's time to start the fun.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ear to There podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week. I'm your host, Phil Gramlich, and each and every week I will bring you a different Walt Disney World word and then give you tips, hints, tricks, all kinds of stuff about that word. Basically, what I'm trying to do here with these episodes of the podcast is give you a quick 15-minute or less Disney fix. Sometimes I go over, sometimes I'm under, but I always aim for that 15-minute mark. I used to say 10 minutes, but that's just way too little time, and I get wordy, as you may have noticed if you listened to any episode of the podcast before. All right, let's get right into it. This week's Walt Disney World Word of the Week is brought to you by the letter R. R for railroad. Now, if you know anything about me, or if you've listened to the show, or if you've read my blog, if I've met you, or if we know each other, I went to high school with you or college, you know that I'm a big Disney fan, but I'm also a big fan of Walt Disney, the man who started it all. I consider myself kind of an amateur Disney historian and Walt Disney historian. I've read every single thing I can get my hands on, and really so much of the early history and the early life of Walt Disney revolves around trains and the railroad. So I want to work my way towards the Disneyland Railroad and the Walt Disney World Railroad, but the best place to start is the beginning. So let me go back to the beginning of Walt's obsession with trains. So let's go back to 1906, when a 5-year-old Walt Disney arrived with his family by train to Marceline, Missouri. Or as I've heard some people from Missouri say it, Missouri. I don't know. Someone explain to me why that's pronounced Missouri if you're from Missouri. I'd love to hear the explanation. Anyway, Walt Disney had often stated during his adult life that his childhood years in Marceline were the best of his life. As a matter of fact, of Marceline, he said, and I quote, "To tell the truth, more things of importance happened to me in Marceline than had happened since, or are likely to happen in the future." Now, Walt and the Disneys only lived in Marceline for a short time, but he would go on to often say that that was the inspiration for Main Street USA, and the trains that rolled through Marceline were the early inspiration for having a train in his backyard and a train in all of his Magic Kingdom-style theme parks. One of Walt Disney's first jobs as a teenager was actually working on the railroads. In 1916, when Walt was 15 years old, he would sell magazines and snacks on the Missouri Pacific, Kansas City Southern, and the Missouri-Kansas-Texas railroads. Walt's uncle, Michael Martin, was a steam railroad engineer when Walt was a kid, and that also helped to kind of fuel his fascination with trains and with the railroads. And throughout Walt's early years, his teenage years, and his adulthood, he never really outgrew that love of trains. So in 1949, when he moved his family to 355 North Carrollwood Drive in Los Angeles, he had a conversation with his wife Lillian that I kind of imagine went like this, and I will play both parts, Walt and Lillian, in this conversation. Okay, here we go. Walt comes into the house one day and says, "Hey, Lily, you know that huge backyard that we have that we bought with all the money I earned from the Disney studio?" And Lily says, "Why, yes, Walt, I know about that backyard." So Walt says, "Listen, I got kind of close with Ward Kimball and Ollie Johnston. They're two of my animators who have backyard railroads. Now listen, Lily, you know I've always wanted to have a backyard railroad. As a matter of fact, I have that huge Lionel train set up down at the studio." And Lily says, Yes, Walt, I know you have that huge setup of Lionel trains at the studio. And I also know that you would love to have a backyard railroad. But you're not building one in our yard because it will ruin my flower beds." Okay, this is ridiculous, but I'm going to finish it because this is more for my amusement than anything else. So hang on tight, here we go. So Walt says, "All right, Lily, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to build a train, There's really nothing you can do that's going to stop me. But I'll make you a deal. You love your flower beds so much. I want the train. What I'll do is I'll dig a huge, long tunnel that goes underneath your flower beds, so you'll still have them to show off to all your friends when they come over, and I will have my train. And Lily says, okay, well, not a bad idea, but we're going to have to put this in writing. She probably sounded just like that in that conversation. Anyway, so Walt and Lillian actually had a railroad right-of-way document made up. It was a humorous document and gave Walt the permission to build the railroad in the backyard. And Lillian once said that it was probably the only railroad right-of-way document that was ever created for people who were married to each other. Okay, so Walt got the go-ahead to build his Carrollwood Pacific Railroad in the yard. Of course, it was called Carrollwood Pacific because it was on Carrollwood Drive. There was a 90-foot-long tunnel that was installed underneath Lillian's flower beds as to not disturb them and have a beautiful flower garden for people to look at when they came over. A really fun fact that I heard, and I think it was Jim Korkis that tells this story. If you don't know who Jim Korkis is, he's a Disney historian. He writes for the Disney Files magazine. And he knows pretty much everything and anything there is to know about the Disneys, Walt Disney, and the early and current days of the Disney company. So he says when they were designing the tunnel under the flower beds, Walt wanted an S-curve included in the tunnel. That would keep the tunnel completely black and dark on one side so nobody could see when they were actually coming out of the other side of the tunnel. When the construction people heard about this, they came to Walt and they said, listen, Walt, it's going to be a lot more expensive to do it this way. It's going to cost an awful lot of more money to put an S-curve in there. Why don't you just do a regular curve? And Walt said, if I was worried about spending money and it being expensive, I wouldn't do this at all, would I? So that was Walt's kind of his way of saying, just build the darn S-curve, do what I want. And that was that. So when the Carrollwood Pacific was running, it was a 1/8 scale live steam working model that was made by Roger Broggie, Disney legend Roger Broggie, in the machine shop on the lot at the Walt Disney Studios. But a lot of the rolling stock of the train was built in Walt Disney's barn that was built on the property in the backyard. Walt would sit in that barn for hours working on new ideas, working on his train, and he could actually control the train from inside the barn. Now, the engine that Roger Broggie built was named the Lily Bell after Walt's wife, Lillian. And that train made its debut on May 7th, 1950 in Walt Disney's backyard. In the next few years, Walt would invite families and friends and celebrities and everyone over to his backyard to take rides on the Lily Bell and the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad. The Carrollwood Pacific is often credited for being one of the things that put the idea of Disneyland first into Walt Disney's head. So by 1953, his interest in the Carrollwood Pacific had kind of waned because he was looking more for a full-size train to, play with. Without getting too far ahead of myself, in 1998, when Walt Disney's old Holmby Hills home, that's hard to say, was about to be sold, the barn that he originally worked in was going to be demolished. But through the efforts of the Walt Disney Family Foundation, that barn was moved intact to Griffith Park in Los Angeles. And it still resides there to this day. So you can go take a tour and check out Walt Disney's original backyard barn. And of course, Griffith Park is the site of the carousel where Walt would sit on the bench and imagine a place where both children and adults could go to have fun together. Of course, that concept brings us to Disneyland. And Walt knew in the first couple days even of planning Disneyland, that he wanted a train to circle the park. When you look at those Herb Ryman sketches of Disneyland that they did in 1953, you will in fact see a train circling the original concept for the park. So after the location was decided on for Disneyland and after all the finances were figured out and it was time to build the Disneyland Railroad, Walt thought he could save money by purchasing a miniature railroad that was already built. So Walt went to a railroad expert named Billy Jones, who owned miniature railroads, and made him an offer. Unfortunately for Walt, maybe fortunately for Walt and for all of us, that offer was declined by Jones, and Walt decided, hey, you know what? We're just going to build these things from scratch. So using the original model of the Lily Bell, Walt had Roger Broggie just enlarge it and build the first engine completely from scratch by following that model. So in 1955, the CK Holiday, named after Cyrus K. Holiday, was built. The other engine that was built for Disneyland's opening in 1955 was the EP Ripley, named after Edward Payson Ripley, and that was designed to resemble the Baltimore and Ohio number 774 locomotive. After those two locomotives were built from scratch, Disneyland decided to bring in already built locomotives from different eras and refurbish them and put them into the fleet of Disney locomotives. So on March 28th, 1958, the Fred Gurley was added, which was actually built in August of 1894. On July 25th of 1959, the Ernest S. Marsh was added. That was actually built in April of 1925. And on June 25th, 2005, the fifth and final locomotive was added to the fleet, named the Ward Kimball, which was actually built in September of 1902. So those are the engines that round out the Disneyland Railroad today. So now I want to take my focus over to the Walt Disney World Railroad at the Magic Kingdom. So when it came to constructing the Walt Disney World Railroad, when it came time to design the Walt Disney World Railroad at the Magic Kingdom, Imagineer Roger Broggie, who was back on the case, decided, listen, it was way too difficult to build those engines from scratch in 1955 in Disneyland. So what we're going to do is go find engines that have already been made, like we've been doing for Disneyland, and repurpose them and refurbish them for our new park. So Roger Broggie gets in touch with railroad historian Jerry Best, who tells him, hey, listen, I think I know some engines that you could be looking for. They are actually down in Mexico. So Broggie, along with Disney Railroad building expert Earl Vilmer, go down to, now I'm going to pronounce this very poorly, my Spanish-speaking friends, so don't judge me too harshly, please. But they go to Merida in the Yucatan in Mexico, to an area that was owned by the United Railways of Yucatan. Or is it Yucatan? Yucatan? Someone correct me. If I'm wrong, I apologize. So they get down there and they decide that there are 4 locomotives in the boneyard that were built by Baldwin Locomotive Works that they could use, that they could refurbish for the park. Also, there was a 5th locomotive that was built by the Pittsburgh Locomotive and Car Works that they thought they could kind of salvage as well. So Roger Broggie paid a total of $32,750 for all 5 locomotives. Actually, he paid $8,000 for each of the original 4 and $750 for the 5th locomotive, which seems like kind of a steal to me. I don't know. I don't sell trains often, but that sounds like a steal. Anyway, the trains were moved to Florida to the Tampa Ship Repair and Dry Dock Company in Tampa, Florida, actually, which was the closest facility to Walt Disney World where they could refurbish these locomotives. So at that facility in Tampa, all 4 of the Baldwin locomotives were fully restored and able to be moved to Walt Disney World. Unfortunately, that 5th locomotive that was purchased for $750 was too damaged and in too much disrepair to be restored. So that one was stored and used for parts for the other locomotives, and then eventually it was sold to a locomotive broker. And in case you did not know that locomotive brokers existed, you do now. So when Walt Disney World opened on October 1st, 1971, 3 of the 4 trains were running. They were the Walter E. Disney, the Lily Bell, which of course is named after Walt's wife, Lillian Disney, and the Roger E. Broggie, who was, again, very instrumental in getting the railroads both at Disneyland and at the Magic Kingdom up and running. The fourth engine, the Roy O. Disney, took a little bit more love to get up and running. That one, of course, was named after Walt's older brother and the guy who was in charge of the finances of the Disney company, Roy O. Disney, and that one got up and running on December 1st, 1971. On opening day, the Walt Disney World Railroad only had one operating stop, and that was at the Main Street train station. So if you wanted to ride on opening day and in the next year, it was truly a grand circle tour because you honestly couldn't get off until you got back to the train station. On May 1st, 1972, the second station, the Frontierland station, opened. That has since been moved around and changed due to the creation of Splash Mountain, but there still is a Frontierland station in the Magic Kingdom. And on June 19th, 1988, the third station opened in the Magic Kingdom. That was the Mickey's Birthday Land station. That station's name changed a couple of times because the land went from being Mickey's Birthday Land to Mickey's Starland to Mickey's Toyland to Mickey's Toontown Fair. And eventually that station was closed in 2011 and replaced with the station that is now at Storybook Circus. And that one opened in 2012. So there was a lot of station name changing, land name changing, all kinds of stuff happening on that end of the Walt Disney World Railroad. Now, on a personal note for me, there's nothing quite like walking up to the train station out in front of the Magic Kingdom and hearing the train whistle and then hearing that awesome, really, really iconic and nostalgic announcement.
Your attention, please. The Walt Disney World Railroad now boarding for a scenic trip around the Magic Kingdom. Board!
And that is going to do it for this week's Ear to There podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week. If you're listening to this, you were awesome, and thank you once again for listening to another one of my episodes. These Word of the Week episodes are a lot of fun. I really like to talk Disney. I like to kind of go back and even learn a little bit myself and kind of try to communicate to you, the listener, what I learned this week. I mean, I know a lot of this stuff, but there's a bunch of it that I learn as I am researching and preparing for these episodes. So I feel like I, along with you, am learning something new each and every week. So these are really a ton of fun. So thanks again for listening. And if you did enjoy this episode, please just tell someone about it. Everyone knows someone that is really into trains, is really into railroading. Please just tell them about this episode. I'd really, really appreciate that. I know I am way into like the model railroading thing. I wish I had the time. I wish I could do it. I love that kind of stuff. I love little like miniatures and railroads, and it really fascinates me. I had the Olszewski Main Street, the Disneyland Main Street, the complete Main Street in my house. I posted pictures of it online. I wish I had the time to kind of tinker with it and make the train go and do all kinds of stuff. I will eventually, but anyway, if you have somebody in your life like me who loves this kind of stuff, please just share this with them. I love talking about the trains. They were one of Walt's favorite hobbies. So thank you so much in advance. And just remember, there will be a new episode of the Ear to There podcast each and every Monday morning, as well as an episode of the Word of the Week each and every Wednesday morning. So until next time, thanks again so much for listening. Have a great week. Bye-bye.